Welcome back to part 2 of chapter 8. Part 1 ended rather abruptly as my phone ran out of space for the video, so let's go pick up right where we left off. We were talking about moral hazard, where one player's choices are not observed by others. Use the example of car insurance. The insurance company doesn't know if you're driving safely or if you're driving more recklessly. They can try to guess based on your car accident history, but that's an imperfect proxy for what you're actually doing. So moving on, now look at the other kind of issue that can arise with asymmetric information, and that issue is called adverse selection. So I'll get this up here to show the contrast. With moral hazard, the issue is that one player's choices are not seen by others. With adverse selection, the issue is that one player's type is not observed by others. And I'll show you what I mean by that with an example. So one example of this is with health insurance. So you're probably wondering, what do I mean by a player's type? Well, with health insurance, your type is whether you're generally healthy or if you're unhealthy. So the company does not directly observe that. This is another case where players' incentives are not aligned, so just having them talk to each other is not going to be very helpful. So anyone's going to claim, I'm really healthy, you should give me a low premium because I'm pretty low risk, whether or not that's actually true. So why could that be a problem? Well, the issue here is that if you offer everyone the same policy at the same price, which seems very much like equal treatment, what's going to happen is that the people who are in poor health will find that a good deal, they'll buy it. The people who are in good health will say, that's too expensive for benefits I'm probably not going to collect. They're going to say, it's not worth it. You'll be stuck with all the sickest patients and your company is going to probably lose money. So the insurance company can't sort out who's risky and who's not, and that's a problem. So why that could be a problem? If your insurance rates are based on average health, but the people you're insuring have below average health, then you've got a mismatch, and that's going to cost you money. So more colloquially, in some of the press, this got referred to as the so-called death spiral for insurance companies. They offer a policy, only the sickest sign up, and that makes the company lose money, what they do is they jack up the premium, so some people who are not quite as sick now say it's not worth leaving the population that's left over even sicker on average. They raise premiums again and again, and the pool just keeps shrinking and shrinking. So that was one issue that we've been worried about with healthcare. So as you can see, these asymmetric information problems can pose some issues in real life, and that's why we look to signaling and screening to try to find ways to overcome these issues. So first, we'll look at an example of screening. So that's when, recall, the less informed side is trying to test the more informed side in a way to get information leveled at asymmetry. So I call this one the Makeup Midterm game. This is based on a professor at the University of Oregon had this policy, and I duplicated it at my own work until I switched schools, and the school there had a different policy which didn't allow it. So here's how it works. So the exam is going to be on a certain day, a certain time, and there's often someone who's going to say they have a crisis that's not going to let them be there. So the issue we face is one of asymmetric information. The student knows they have a real crisis. The professor does not. Anyone can say that, anyone can say, for example, anyone can say, my grandmother just died, whether or not that's actually true. So the professor has to have some way to determine if that excuse is valid or not. Or anyone can say, I'm sick, by email, whether or not they're actually sick. The professor needs to have some way of verifying. So, for example, I might worry about things like, what if they just partied late at night and got drunk and didn't actually study, just trying to stall for time? I don't want to reward that kind of behavior, but I have difficulties in verifying if they're really telling the truth with their excuse. So here's how I can model that with game theory. So we have external uncertainty, in this case, the professor being uncertain if the student is being honest. We model that as being determined by chance. And nature's a player who does that with chance. So with some probability, there's a real crisis. Maybe our student got the coronavirus, they're in the hospital, and they really can't take the midterm right now, and they're telling the truth. Or a smaller probability, maybe just making up excuses, stalling for time. I saw a book about it was about dishonesty in general, but they had one interesting case study. They asked professors about the mortality of students' grandmothers. A popular excuse for not taking an exam was, my grandmother just died. That's why I used that example earlier. So, of course, grandmother deaths should be about evenly scattered across the semester. But according to what students told professors, grandmothers were way more likely to die during midterms week and even more likely to die during finals week. That sounds suspicious. So there's probably a little bit of dishonesty going on here. Not everyone knows the truth all the time. So there really is uncertainty. So after there's an emergency or no emergency, the professor has to make a move. They can either give the makeup exam at some later day, or they can deny and say you just get a 0 on that test. And here are the payoffs. So let's put the payoffs with the professor's payoff on top. And a student on the bottom. So the student had a real crisis, the professor allows a makeup exam. Let's say it's a payoff of 0 for the professor. The student is happy that they got a chance to take it at a better time. If the student has a real crisis and the professor denies the makeup exam, the professor gets a payoff of -1. They are unhappy with denying someone who had some legitimate reason for not being there. But a student is also really unhappy because now they're getting a 0 when things outside of control prevent them from taking an exam. So we really don't like that outcome. Now, another possibility is that there's no real crisis, they just made things up, but you go to midterm anyways. That means we're rewarding dishonesty and lack of work ethic. That's also a bad outcome for the professor. But a student is happy that they got to take the exam at a convenient time for them and they got away with being dishonest. If instead we deny the student who just made stuff up, then let's say it's a payoff of +1 for the professor and -10 for the student. So that's the setup of the game. So now look at the solution, how it would involve screening. So this game here shows the professor really has no idea whether the student has a real emergency or if they're just making up excuses to take the exam later. So the solution that the University of Oregon professor found was the following. Let me move this up. So our screening is that the less informed side takes some kind of action that's going to test or screen out the more informed side. So the way it worked here, the professor allows you to take a makeup exam, no questions asked, no matter what your excuse is. But there's a twist at the end. He warned the students that if you do take the makeup exam, it'll be significantly harder than the regular exam. So how does that lead to screening? Well, if you had a real crisis and things that are truly outside your control prevent you from taking the exam at the regular time, you'd accept this. You take the makeup exam anyways. If you have no real crisis, you're just making stuff up, then it's better to take the usual exam rather than take the harder makeup exam. So in that case, you don't ask for makeup exam in the first place. You just go to the usual exam at the usual time. So that way you can separate out the people who have a real crisis from those who are just making up excuses. So this brings up an issue of possible solutions to asymmetric formation. There are two kinds of equilibria in general, two broad classes of equilibria, I should say. So one of them is called a separate equilibrium. Students of different types, in this case, emergency or no emergency, end up with different outcomes. So here with this test, by wording that's more difficult, you successfully separate the ones with a real emergency from ones who don't have a real emergency.